everyone, welcome to another episode of the Volcanic Gardener. Now I'm wearing these gloves simply because today I'm going to be doing some repotting of this lovely Cycas, or Cycas as they're sometimes known. It's native to Japan, not terribly hardy, although tougher than people will think. The important thing is that it only throws up one set of leaves, at least in this climate where we are here, each year, so you don't want to lose those and you don't want to lose other leaves in the crown, otherwise you'll simply have to cut them off. It will regenerate, but it's a bit of a waste. So I'm wearing these gloves because pruning yesterday, cut myself a little bit. You don't want to get infections from the soil. Even if the soil is sterilised that you're using, it's a good idea to wear gloves. I'm not wearing gardening gloves because you need a little bit of feel when you're doing this kind of thing. So for today's video, I'll be repotting this relatively mature cycas. It's about 10 years old. It's in this rather garish, nasty plastic pot. I want to put it into a bigger pot where it will remain for the next 3 or 4 years, maybe hopefully up to 5 years. It's a lovely Japanese terracotta pot, about the same depth as the existing pot, but the roots will be able to have a bit more room. Perhaps a little bit big, but as I say, I'm not here all the time. I can't repot as much as I would if it was if I was permanently in the same place. This has done quite well this year. I brought it inside. I'm here today in the plant room, my gardening room in the main house. It's not heated, but it gets full sun most of the day, at least when the trees outside have lost their leaves. So in the winter time, it's a very good place for storing stuff, just taking the frost off. Behind the camera, my potatoes are chitting nicely. So what we need today are basic gardening tools, some compost, some crocks, some grit if you have any grit, but if you don't have grit, have another bash, make the crocks a bit smaller. I wanted to use those up. And that's all you really need to do. If your cycad has got some brown stuff, good chance to prune them off. Mine's pretty good this year. Obviously you don't want any weeds. What I do is I take it outside from around about May onwards. It's hot enough here. We're 800 metres above sea level, so it does get cold. It warms up fairly late in the season, remains warm until about November when I bring it inside. The other thing is it likes sunshine, but obviously if you're not there to water it regularly, you do not want it baking in full sunlight. It will tolerate, as long as it gets about 6 to 7 hours of sunshine a day, it will do fine. What I do is when I'm here, I move it to the spot that I like it. That could be in quite direct sunshine, or it could be in much more shade than it would normally grow in. I'm not here for weeks on end, I'm here for a few days at a time. And then I just move it back to a location that's in semi-sun, and I know it will survive pretty well. So let's get on with the project. I've just got some good all-purpose vegetable compost there. You could use any similar compost. You could mix it in with a bit of garden soil if it's pricey where you are. It can be quite expensive. You can of course make your own compost. The important thing is these things do not like to sit in water. So here you can see it's got a massive hole in the middle and 3 holes around the side. So what I'm going to do is just take these old crocks and put a large crock over the central hole, not that big, but over the central hole. A few more of larger crocks over those holes. You want to make sure that water can get through, don't block the hole obviously. And then I'm going to throw in a layer of these much smaller crocks. If you've got grit, or even small shingle type stuff, you could throw it in the bottom as well, no problem. So let's see whether this is going to work. I'm going to give it a bit of a bash. There we go. So a crock like that is perfect to cover that central hole. No, it's not actually, a little bit bigger. Let's take that. Sorry about the noise. So I've got a few others. This was a lovely, lovely pot originally. Unfortunately, I was careless one day moving them. So I've got into that some big crocks, and now I'm just going to throw in these much smaller crocks. They're sort of small. And also these are from a terracotta pot that was not frost hardy. So it's not fired at a very high temperature, it's pretty cheap. There's a series of pots I smashed up, and actually in Victorian times they used to grind up pots and add some of it to a mix to keep it sweet and durable. So these are going to go in here. This is a nice old pot. So we've got a layer of crops in there, that's looking quite nice. You know what it looks like. As I said, put grit in there if you wish. Now the other thing I might add here are some bits of charcoal. Charcoal is very good antibacterial agent. Ideally you can get charcoal powder, or just sort of smash it up into smaller bits. As small as possible really, but just that will help to take any of the nasty stuff. Smaller the better. I should smash it up, but I'm not going to the video. It's absolutely fine. So we've now got our pot, can you see it, with a range of shingle in like that, free flowing. It's going to go onto the bottom so that we can have a look at what we've got here. So I've kept it dry for the winter, only occasionally, once or twice a month, giving it a cupful of water just to make sure it doesn't sort of petrify, as it were. As you can see, it's got basically 2 layers of fronds and they're in pretty good condition. So let's see what the roots are like. It's spiky, so if you do have gloves, wear gloves. Where have my gloves gone? Back in a mo, gloves are on, and it's just a case of trying to see what we've got, and obviously trying to resist as much rain. Trying to keep as much root ball as you can. That pot can be washed and obviously reused, it's plastic. Now, that's showing signs that it should have been repotted maybe last year, but I didn't have time to do it. It's perfectly alright. So we don't want any of these weeds. Let's take this opportunity to remove as many of these weeds as possible. I have repotted it once in its life, but it's a good idea to try and get rid of those weeds. I'm not a purist, I don't mind. They're not harming the plant in any way. Now try and keep that root ball intact, but as you can see it's also going off at an angle. That's because where it is here in this plant room, the sunshine is only coming from one direction, so it's trying to naturally, of course, turn. We will just rectify that angle when we do this. Let's just take the opportunity to have a look at the roots. You see, I did the same trick last time, which was to put the crocks in. Let's just open up those roots a little bit, make sure they can get out into the pot. May seem drastic, indeed drastic, but that's the way one works here. It's the Volcanic Gardener. Let's put our pot up here. There we go. Now, obviously you don't want to put the roots directly down onto this crockery layer, although as you could have seen it was doing okay. So let's get some of this compost out and spill everywhere on it. Always be careful when you're using a tool inappropriately. It's very, very tempting when you're gardening to make do, Heath Robinson if you were. Using a shovel to smash something up, using these in a way that they're not designed to be used. So really, right tool, right job is the way to go. But I've been doing it years and it should be okay. So, those little nits are fine. Now, as you can see, this compost, excuse me, this compost, if you can see it, has got some inclusions already to allow it to be nice and open, because that's what we want free draining stuff. I used to have a lovely scoop. That's the other mystery with gardening. What happens to tools? Excuse me. What happens with tools? I've had some wonderful tools over the years, and they slowly, like sheep in a farmer's field, do their own thing. So I'm going to make do with my hands today. I have got a scoop somewhere. Obviously, again, you don't want to waste soil. Soil is quite expensive, especially this decent stuff. What should we do? I think we can probably improvise and use this scoop just to make sure that we don't waste too much. So I'm just putting in a layer of this compost. And as I said, this has got some inclusions. It's already got some vermiculite and things like that in it, so that's really good for us, good news. And the root ball itself has already got a lot of grit around it. That was when I repotted it last time. So we don't need to titivate or do too much with it. There we can see it's got quite a nice crown already. Let's dump it in and see whether we've got the right height. And I would say that's absolutely perfect. Now we do have that slight issue of the trying to get it so it's not angling, but it has a sort of natural angle on it at the moment, but we'll correct that. So stand back before we bung in the stuff. How is it looking? Well, we want some fronds to throw up here. I think they will if I place it in the right place, in the right orientation. Everything's looking pretty healthy in there. We've got rid of as many weeds as we can, just to make sure the roots are opening up, and then simply add compost as much as we can. Just shove it around. As I said, it's an improvised scoop. Once you've got one base layer in, make sure you do it in stages. Make sure it ramifies around all the roots, the space for the roots to ramify into. So I think that's all right for a first layer. So we've got the first layer, and now we want to make sure that we got the placement right. It's in the centre. It's as nicely balanced as we can possibly get it. As I said, it's more or less balanced. There are a few smaller fronds than there, and then working your hands around the base. Some people just bung all the stuff in and then they push from the top. Not the best policy. Always best to do it in stages. So I put the first layer in. I'm making sure that's really nicely in contact with the compost, and then I can double check it. Looking pretty good from several angles. A little bit of correction required there. Push it in, firm it in. Make sure the roots are coming out a bit, and then do it again. And obviously, if it's a really big plant, you might want to do that 3 times. It's a little bit different when you're planting in the soil itself, but not terribly different. So we're using lots of compost here. And when you do use compost like this inside, and it falls onto the floor as it's done there beautifully, then sweep it up, put it back. Don't waste products. Reuse, wash, disinfect pots and things like that. When you've got smashed pots, don't just throw them away. Smash them up with a hammer and use them as crocks. Why would we want to waste? Don't care how rich you are or how much time you've got. Don't waste stuff. So I think that's at about the right level. You can see it's just got a little bit of. It's quite. At the base, it's got a little bit of what would we call that, sort of moss almost growing. As I said, I don't mind that. Other plants are not the enemy here, and it is left outside, and if it wants to grow weeds in it, if I see them, I'll pull them out, but let's not be too purist about this. So I think we're nearly there. We don't want to plant it too deep, or remember the crown will rot. But equally, we do want it to have a little bit of stability. I think I'm happy with that. Now, unfortunately, I don't have any grit at the moment. When I do get some horticultural grit, this isn't yet going outside, so it doesn't have any problems at the moment. it's not on show. When it's on show, I will sprinkle a layer of grit. So I've left it a little bit lower to put some grit on top. That will stop the weed seeds floating onto it and growing up. It will give it a little bit more protection and it just looks nicer. So once you've done that, always tidy up. So I've got a range of brushes up here. Some very nice brushes. Just brush off from the pot and take the opportunity also to remove from the crown any leaves that are unsightly. They're not doing the plant any harm whatsoever, but they just look unpleasant. So I think we're more or less there. Just give it a little bit of a brush. And if you do have a spare paintbrush or something like that that's obviously clean, I've got this very nice brush here which was used. It's a really soft brush. You might now look, it's really soft, and it was used for cleaning dehumidifiers, the back of it. So it's really delicate. It's used for electronic equipment. I use it here in the garden, and what you can do is you can just brush these fronds. If a plant is outside, it's totally unnecessary to brush the leaves because the atmosphere, the wind, the rain will remove any dust that's on it. However, when a plant's inside, it sits, it doesn't have those kind of forces that will self-clean almost. So it's a good idea to just give it a brush. That allows it to photosynthesize better and just looks better. Now, it's still around about 5 degrees, 6 degrees at most in the daytime. It drops to about 0 degrees, -1 here. So it needs to be kept in still, and I will keep it in here until May, but I will start to introduce some more moisture to it. So it's starting to trigger growth. If you've got a spray, it's a good idea to spray the fronds just to liven them, freshen them up a little bit. Under here on this board, this is a sink. So see you in a minute when I've tidied up. I'll show you the final thing and we'll just water it, and that's how to replant a Cycas. It will be happy, but the key is not to rush it out, and the key is to make sure it's in the right location where it doesn't absolutely bake, unless you've got a really big pot, in which case it probably would survive okay, but in a pot this size, it cannot be in 34 degrees sunshine that we get in summer when I'm not here to water it regularly. Okay, welcome back. So I've had a bit of a tidy up, a clean up. Good thing to do in gardening is to have self-discipline. Look after your tools, make sure they're sharp and kept clean. Make sure that when you do a job, you pack up any extra materials well, you tie it nicely up if you've got a bag of compost that's half used and so forth. Put tools back in their right place, sweep up, just make sure that everything is as if it would be in your living room or in your dining room. Treat the garden room as a kitchen. So there it is, that's where it will sit for the next month or so until I put some grit on the surface and take it outside. And I'll show you an update of that in its situ. I'm hoping it will make, and signs are in the crown, it will make another layer. So that will come up here and it's starting to get a reasonably substantial plant. Obviously, there start to come issues of weight. It's a heavy pot already, starting to get a reasonably large plant, so that needs to be factored into all considerations when you're doing gardening. If you're taking in lemons or if you're taking in large pots to overwinter, think about how you're going to do that safely for your back. I've had bad back injuries in the past, so do be careful. This is why some people are starting to use resin pots, not plastic pots, but resin pots that look very realistic. They're to some extent better for the environment, but I love the traditional terracotta pots. So it's a compromise, as life is always. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to water this, and then it will leak out through this surface. This is a lovely old French kitchen sink. I do have waterproof floor with a drain, and it's also got underfloor heating, so that actually adds a nice bit of humidity. So I'm not too worried about having a dish. Of course, if you're in a place where it needs a dish, give it a dish. So let's water our plants now. So not too much. I'm not trying to flood it, but whenever you give the plant a trauma, it doesn't matter what the season is, it is always a good idea to just give it some water. And what that water is doing is, as much as anything, helping the soil to settle around the roots itself. Because the contact that the roots have with the soil is an incredibly important union. And there's of course various bacteria and things which are good. So here we have, let's just water it. So I'm not trying to soak it, I'm just allowing it to bed down a little bit. Probably one more. This is a big pot, so that's the other thing with soil. When you're thinking about the size of pot to the plant, you don't want to put a small plant in a massive pot. The problems you'll get there is you have to water it more, danger of waterlogging, and it's just more expensive in resources. More gravel required at the top, more water's required to actually soak and make sure that the compost is wet. So bear that in mind. It's going to need one more actually. You can see it's not even soaking through the bottom yet. And I've given it 2 of these fish bowlfuls of water. This will be the last one now. Okay, so I'm happy with that now, and nothing more to do for a few more weeks, just until it's warm enough to put out, and I've got a lovely location for that to go in. I'm pretty happy. I have in the past lost a lot of the lower leaves. I've had to cut them off, and then you only get one set, which is a bit naff and disappointing really, isn't it? So gravel, think carefully about the choice of gravel. What type of gravel will suit this kind of pot? What colours have you got in your garden? What is the base on which it's going to go on? Do be careful when you're buying gravel that you don't get stuff that's just been swept up from non-sustainable sources, or indeed areas that have salt. If you are worried about that, always give your gravel a rinse through first. Okay, so hopefully that's educational. If you've got any questions, put them in the chat below, and I will see you next time. Bye for now.